Well, okay.
Let's hear it for a smooth transition, ladies and gentlemen.
Welcome to So What, the Marketing Analytics and Insights live show from Trust Insights. As you can see, it is just myself and John this week, which is why the transitions are not nearly as smooth as when Chris does them. So please bear with us. So, John, today, Chris is actually over doing the Marketing Profs B2B event. So if you guys want to check him out, all of his stuff will be on demand after the fact, as well as this video will be on demand after the fact. So we are not offended if you want to go follow Chris.
I do. I'm totally offended. Definitely stay here. Keep watching.
John will find you. He is Liam Neeson.
Particular set of skills. Here we go.
So what we're covering today is, so we're wrapping up a bit of the personal branding topic that we had been working on. And so what we're doing today is we're getting set up with Google Data Studio, a very basic dashboard. And so where we want to start first is with a little bit of business requirements and KPIs, or key performance indicators, because John, what often happens when people start setting up dashboards and reports is they kind of just throw everything at it. And I've definitely been guilty of this before, where you just sort of throw all of the data that you have at the dashboard and then try to make sense of it. And what we want to encourage people to do is actually to do a little bit more planning around what is it that you want to know. And so what we have as we very gracefully transition our screens is a little bit of a cheat sheet for how you can do business requirements. And so the term business requirements tends to feel a little bit daunting. It gets to be this like big, overwhelming set of things that you have to gather from multiple people. And really, especially when you're just putting together like a report or a dashboard, you can keep it fairly simplistic, but you should have some sort of a plan going into putting together that reporting, because as Chris likes to say, what is it? Data without decision is just distraction. I think I got that right.
Yeah, nailed it.
So a very simple way to sort of plan out what you want to put in your report is to think about the different personas. Who's going to be looking at the report, who's reading the report, who cares about the thing, and who is going to be making decisions with it. And so this persona statement is actually borrowed from user stories, which you can do in Agile development. As you're putting together your software requirements, you usually do the user stories. And so I borrowed this for this particular type of activity because what I really like about it is that it's very flexible. And so the basic structure of the requirement is, as a persona, I want to so that, and the persona is the audience. So who is ingesting the information, who's reading it? I want to, what is the intent of the thing so that, what's the outcome? And so basically what it's saying is you want to know who's looking at it, why they want the thing, and what they want to be able to do with it. And so I put together a couple of simple examples of what that looks like. And so as a CMO, I want to understand which channels are performing so that I know where to allocate budget and deploy resources. And so if you're looking at all of your digital channels, you'd probably want to know, okay, organic search is performing and email is performing, but we're spending $100,000 a month in paid ads and they're not performing. So perhaps I need to relook at that information. And so that's the kind of information that you would want to include in a dashboard that you're giving to the CMO. Another one could be, as a CMO, I want to understand which channels are performing so that I know which channels are driving leads. And so within Google Analytics, if you're setting up your goals, then you can start to tie in which channels are driving those goals. And that's something that we'll be taking a look at when we start to put together the Data Studio dashboard. And just a couple of other quick examples. So as a marketing manager, I want to understand which channels are driving traffic so that I know where my customers are coming from. And as a marketing manager, I want to understand which channels are driving traffic so that I can ensure each channel has the right messaging. And so obviously these would all be customized based on the type of work that you do, the type of goals that you have set at your organization, and the type of information that you typically make your decisions from. So John, let's say that we were setting this up for marketing over coffee. What kinds of things would you be looking for?
Yeah, for the stuff we've got going on the site over there, it's, we're looking for subscribers to the newsletter. So that's the first thing. It's, how many views did we get to those pages? How many converted? The other thing is to look at, when the report is going wrong, does it kind of give you an idea of what to do next? And so obviously we've got that, we want the newsletter conversion. So we're looking at those forms, but then I'd also want to look at the 2 or 3 campaigns that push people towards the newsletter. So, we also want to look at what's happening with Facebook and LinkedIn ads and content to see, is that driving traffic to those sign up pages, so we can actually see, look further up the funnel and see what's going on.
So for you, ultimately, one of your goals is newsletter signups and then podcast subscribers. Those are the 2 big things that you care about the most.
Yeah, that's the real, it's all about, we need the tonnage to keep the advertisers interested. And that's really what drives everything.
Got it. And that makes sense. And, for my personal site, which is what we started off this whole personal branding exercise with, I would probably want to know something very similar. I would want to know how many people are viewing and filling out the contact form and how many people are subscribing to the newsletter, which, you could make the argument, well, those are 2 very simple metrics. Why can't you just go into your website and then go into your, email provider and look at those 2 numbers? Well, let's say I have a million things going on that day. I just want to go to one place, and that would be that dashboard, and just see that information updated in real time. And so that's why we really encourage people to set up a Google Data Studio dashboard connected to your Google Analytics. And one thing I know that Chris has talked about a bit is that with Google Analytics 4, which was just rolled out a couple of weeks ago, the Google ecosystem is really trying to push you in the direction of using Analytics and Tag Manager and Data Studio all in conjunction. They've taken away a lot of the reporting functionality in Google Analytics 4 with the goal of you putting that information together in Data Studio. So we'll get to what that looks like in just a minute. So now that we sort of have like that idea of how you start to really think about who the audience is, if you need to have different kinds of dashboards, what kind of metrics they want to look at, you can also do very simple KPI mapping exercises. And so I like to use this example when I talk about KPIs because it's a very straightforward, okay, this all makes sense. It's that linear. So KPIs are comprised of 3 different numbers. It's your goal, and that's sort of the ultimate, that big number. You have the KPI itself, which is the health of whether or not your goal is moving in the direction you want it to. And then you have the metrics that feed up into the KPIs and then ultimately the goal. And this is also a really good exercise to do before you start putting reporting and dashboards together, because it helps you map out only the important metrics. And so one of the things that I see a lot, and I've been guilty of a lot, is putting too many metrics in a dashboard thinking I need to look at everything. But am I really going to make a decision on everything? Maybe, maybe not. And as you get into like larger companies and, bigger teams and enterprise size agencies, you start to see they just start to throw a lot of metrics at a report and at a dashboard. And then it just becomes convoluted of what should I be paying attention to. So in this example, it's pretty safe to say that almost every company has some kind of a revenue goal. And you can always use revenue as an anchor, unless you're a nonprofit. But for-profit companies, revenue is usually a safe goal. So you can say, let's say my goal is $100,000. Okay, great. Well, how do I usually get revenue? Well, I sell stuff, and we have an online e-commerce website. So we sell stuff through our website. So we know that to get to $100,000, we need people to fill out carts. And so you can use that cart fill as your KPI to say, yes, people are doing the thing or they're not doing the thing. And so what I'm not showing in this example is a little bit of the math that goes behind the scenes. And so in this example, we're assuming about a 10% conversion rate of people who fill the cart and then also complete that cart fill, because you have to factor in things like cart abandon. And that might be another metric to put in your Data Studio dashboard. So to get to $100,000, we need about 10,000 cart fills, because each cart fill is worth about $10, or it could be $100. My math is going to be really bad today. So that's not the important part. The important part is sort of doing the mapping. And then to get 10,000 cart fills, we know using that sort of same 10% conversion, we need about 100,000 site visits. And so those are the metrics that you can start putting into your dashboard to say, we know if we get 100,000 site visits at a 10% conversion rate, we're probably going to get 10,000 cart fills, meaning we're going to reach our goal of $100,000. Does that all make sense, John?
That's it. Yeah, it's literally back solving. Hopefully you've got the real data in hand so that these numbers are real. It's very painful the first time you go through and you're just pulling them out of a hat. But yeah, it's you just set up the linear funnel and map it to the reports.
Mm-hmm. And so when I was taking a look at, when I was preparing for this and I was taking a look at my website, I realized that yes, all of these goals are important, but the things, again, that I would be tracking the most is the contact form completion and the newsletter subscribe. And I just put this here as a little bit of a cheat sheet because when you're going into Data Studio, it's good to know the goal ID number. And so I'm looking for goal ID 3 and goal ID 4. So Google Data Studio. If you're using Google Analytics and you're using Google Tag Manager, then you have Google Data Studio. You can use Google Data Studio without Google Analytics, but using it with Google Analytics is the most common application of it. So when you get to Google Data Studio, it gives you sort of the list of all the reports you already have, or if you're just getting started, it gives you sample reports in this template gallery, and you can build a report using one of their templates. So, and it tells you what kind of data it pulls in. So this example, Acme Marketing pulls in Google Analytics data. This Search Console report pulls in Search Console data, YouTube Analytics, a Google Sheet, which you can update and then it pulls directly in, Google Analytics and Google Ads data. So it uses a lot of different kinds of data, and it's not just Google data that it can pull in. So let's take a look at first connecting a data source. And so what you would do is you would go to data sources and then create. And so I'm going to create a data source, and what I'm going to do is connect it to my website. And what you can see is that the native connectors, there's 18 Google connectors. And so you have Analytics, Ads, Google Sheets, BigQuery, which is what is one of the newer features of Google Analytics 4, Campaign Manager, all of these different things by Google, you can pull into without having any sort of middleman connector. And then other data sources, partner connectors, are a lot of your CRM data, your social media data. So a lot of people ask about how do I automate a lot of my social metrics? So Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. A lot of those are done by partner connectors. Some of the more common ones being Supermetrics. You have Tap Clicks here, Find My Insight, Adversify. And so as you're going through, you can see which of these services you might already subscribe to. And then that connector in the middle allows you to automatically connect the data and have it automatically update. Now, a lot of these, there is a fee associated with that. So that really comes down to what kind of investment you're looking to make within your company. If you don't have the opportunity or you don't have the budget, the workaround for that is to pull the data from one of these non-native, non-Google platforms into a Google Sheet and connect the Google Sheet directly into the dashboard to display it the way that you want it to. It sort of cuts down that copying and pasting into a report because you can export or take screenshots of the Data Studio dashboard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect my Katie Robert Google Analytics account to Google Data Studio, so then I can just start to go ahead and put together a dashboard. So you can see, because this particular account has access to my Google Analytics, it's very straightforward. So there it is, I select it. And now before I hit connect, one of the pro tips is if you're managing for a lot of different companies, name your data source, because what ends up happening, and what we actually experienced recently until I painstakingly went through and renamed all of the data sources, is that they all by default have the exact same name. So as you're setting up a dashboard, they all tend to have the same exact, you can't tell which one is which. And so I'm just going to go ahead and put this here. And so you see, and now it's the Katie Robert GA. And then for the most part, you don't need to monkey around with the dimensions in Google Analytics. It all comes out the way that you would expect it to. If you have custom things built in, then you can certainly add those in. And then you can go ahead and create a report. And so you always start with this blank page, and you can see here, you have data source, it's Katie Robert GA. If you're looking to do multiple accounts, then you can obviously add different charts with different data sources. And it starts you off with the most basic, which page, and then new users. You don't have to keep this by any means, but for the sake of, this podcast or live stream, we can certainly keep that. What I want to know as the owner of my website is that conversion data. And so what I want to do is add a chart, and I want to add, let's start with a scorecard. So a scorecard is basically just that one singular number. And so the metric I'm actually after is goal. So I want to know goal completion. And you can start to, just search through here. And I know based on the work that we did previously that I'm looking for goal 3 and goal 4. So you can see here, and depending on how big your screen is, this is a little bit of a pain in the butt to see, but you can just kind of roll over it and see. I just want the goal completion straight up number, starts, value, conversion rate. I just want the straight up goal completion from somewhere, anywhere. So anyway, but basically what you do is you start to put together the total number of, things that you want. So I want to know total number of goal completions for goal 3. Then you would rename each of these. I don't know why this is being finicky, but let's say I want to know a table with bars, and this might be a little bit better of an example. Now, again, I'm no Chris Penn, and I can't do this nearly as quickly or as seamlessly as he does, but you are stuck with myself and John today. So John, I know you don't necessarily have reports set up for Marketing Over Coffee or for your website in general, but what would your reports start to look like?
The thing with that, checking out traffic trends is a big deal for us too. We kind of just want to know how many visitors are coming in, which days of the week are most popular, trying to get a better feel for the seasonal variety of things. And we've been fortunate in that the whole podcasting flow is a lot flatter than we had initially planned or thought. We thought it was going to be very seasonal, very kind of have certain days or times where you wanted to drop content, but it's actually proven to be pretty flat and pretty steady. So it hasn't been, a huge problem. We don't have to spend a ton of time on it. And because of that, we're more just looking on the monthly basis to make sure that things are always trending in an upward fashion. So yeah, we don't have to spend, a lot of time on the daily or weekly basis. It's more just checking in on the monthly thing to make things are not broken. And then of course you do want to have a mid-month check, because the worst thing you can do is, if you're only on a monthly cycle, if you come back and something's broken, you could have 3.5 bad weeks of data, which is, is going to ruin your whole year in some cases. So you've got always have your cycle being half of what you want your view time to be, and that'll keep you on track.
Mm-hmm. All right. So I've started to put together, and this is going to be a really ugly dashboard, but you can see the contact form completion data and the acquisition source. And so one of the things that I would probably want to know is, where are people coming from when they're getting to the contact page? Because that's, a really useful thing to know is, are they coming from Google? Am I just redirecting to myself? Okay, that may be something that I need to sort out in my settings, because I shouldn't be redirecting to myself. Um, and then again, the standards one that it just sort of starts you off with is the page title and the total new users to that page. And so what you would probably want to do is add in a date range control. That's actually a really helpful thing to have. We usually just kind of stick it up here, and then when you view, then you can change the dates, which makes it actually much better, because the default date range is 28 days. And if you don't include a date range picker, then you can't change the date within the dashboard once you publish it and give it to somebody else. And then the nice thing is that it's actually really easy to edit these. So you can see you have a whole bunch of different kinds of charts. One of the reasons why my dashboard looks so sad is because there's really no data attached to it. We only just set up the site a couple of weeks ago, and I think I've been pretty honest about the fact that I don't really do much with my website, but that is something, moving into next year will definitely be something of value as an additional asset for Trust Insights. So you can see that there's like a geo chart. So for companies that might do, work in a lot of different counties or different states, they may want to see, what those states are looking like in terms of total traffic coming from Alaska versus Nevada versus California. So that could be something interesting to include. You have tree maps, pivot tables, scatter plots, area. And you can see that one of the challenges, again, is that they give you so many options that if you don't go in having some kind of a plan, then you might just kind of get lost in the shuffle of, okay, I'm just going to throw everything in and see how it looks. And that could be problematic, because then it could get overwhelming and unorganized. And that people are going to ask for additional things. So you don't have to throw in everything all at once. What I would actually recommend doing is, so let's say I have a certain number of things that I want to look at, and then John, you have a certain number of things that you want to look at. So what I could do is just add a page. So now I'm on page 2. And so when I go ahead and look at these pages, I could say the first page is, Katie's metrics, if I can spell. And then the second page is John's metrics. And so what you're doing is thinking about going back to that persona example. As a CEO, I want to look at where people are coming from so that I know, which channels to prioritize. Whereas for, John, if you're looking at the same set of metrics, instead of creating multiple different dashboards, you can create one book of dashboards and just have different pages that have different intents. And so on the second page, let's say, as the business development partner, I want to know, how many leads we got this month so that I know sort of the health of the sales pipeline. And this is where you could start including different data sets. And so we're starting with Google Analytics, but we could also, using a partner integration, pull in our CRM data. We could pull in our email marketing data. We could pull in our social data. And so if you have a variety of different people on your team, then you might have a bunch of different asks. So create different pages versus creating, 6 different dashboards that all have a different link and you can't find them all. Keep them all consolidated in one place. So John, what am I forgetting? Because this is, putting together a dashboard, it should be really straightforward. And there are a lot of things that you can do with it. The thing to remember is the Data Studio dashboard is not the place where you would do the analysis. It is just a visual representation of the data. So if you're looking to, change the numbers or calculate metrics, this is not necessarily the place to do it. You can filter, you can bring in your segments, but that's really sort of the advanced functionality you can do within this kind of a dashboard.
Yeah, and I think a really important part with this is it's the same thing for any CRM system or marketing automation system. All these systems come with the reports out of the box, and that's the biggest mistake you can make as you get into this process. You want to frame this the right way. Nobody gets a report or a dashboard until they've already come to you and laid out, the strategy and the KPIs that you've gone through. Because what you want to do is have just somebody gets their single first report and you make sure that they work on that. The biggest mistake you can do is have 10 sample reports and 10 pages and it's just, it's not going to get looked at. You want to, for this stuff to have value, it needs to be built custom and always needs to be specifically answering a question, that is going to be checked. And the goal is you want that to be checked daily if possible, so people can see where things change without having to root around in views in GA or in the CRM system or wherever. So, it's this is, it should be the weatherboard. It should be where people go to see what's going on today and figure out what steps to take next and trim away anything that's not getting used on a regular basis.
Exactly. And I think that that's one of the challenges with, at the end of the month, you always have the monthly reporting, doing multiple reports. They go into a PowerPoint. Sometimes they're never looked at. And, they just kind of like sit on a pile of reports. Whereas this is a little bit more dynamic. You set it up once and mostly you just kind of monitor it and make sure that things like the connections aren't breaking. If you're using a partner integration, partner connection, like a Supermetrics or some other service, you might just want to make sure that like the account is still up to date, that it hasn't broken anything or something has changed. I know if you're pulling directly from like an API, sometimes they'll change and you have to relook at that. So one of the questions is this just for on screen or can save off and print too? So I think what you're asking is, can you just look at this on screen and then that's it? No. So what you can do is, you can download the report. It's the snapshot for whatever that time frame is for when you download it. So if I download this right now, it's whatever settings I have. So I have this set right now to the last 28 days. So this is going to show me the last 28 days of data when I download it into a PDF. I can schedule an email delivery. So maybe I have someone on my team who can't remember, the URL. So I just want to go ahead and make it as easy as possible. So once a week, I go ahead and schedule that they're going to get an email with the latest and greatest data that I've put together in this dashboard. Obviously, you can invite people into it to view it or edit it, totally your call. You can get the report link. A lot of people sometimes take this link of this dashboard and embed it into another system. So if you have your own intranet, like a SharePoint or, whatever your CRM is, whatever you're using, a lot of times they will embed this directly in there so that the data is updating in Google Data Studio, but it's a little bit more of a seamless experience for people who are using multiple systems. So they don't have to go to multiple places to see this information. And then the other thing that you can do with this information is if you're in the view version of it, you see these three little dots here. It's that more. You can download the data itself. You can export the data into sheets, and you can sort, by the however many columns it has. So, if you're getting this information and you're like, I just want to see the raw numbers, well, great. It saved you a step. You don't have to also pull the information. You can download the data that you're looking at from the report, whatever your settings are, into a CSV file and do additional analysis that way. So it's pretty flexible. Again, Google Data Studio is really just that visualization where you can kind of pull everything together and tell the story, versus trying to do more advanced calculation that you might do in like a BigQuery or even a more advanced system like Tableau, where you can do a little bit more of that data manipulation. So I just want to show you a quick example of a much better, looking dashboard. So this is something that I put together a while ago because what I wanted to know was where people were coming from. So I called it the top pages and referring sources. But I also wanted to know if we were making any setting mistakes by referring to ourselves. And so what I was able to glean from our data is, okay, we're getting a lot of referral traffic from Twitter, from LinkedIn, which we know is miscategorized in Google Analytics. It should be social data. But we are seeing, so Chris recently published a blog post on Business Wire, and that is referring people to our website, and then they are completing a goal. Whether that goal in here, if I remember correctly, would either be a newsletter sign up or contact us. And then I can just sort of see all other traffic. And the other thing to note about Google Data Studio, especially if you're setting it up on behalf of a client or someone who isn't in your organization, you can also customize the look and feel of it. So you have the theme, you have the layout, you can change the colors to be your company's colors, your client's company's colors. And so there's a lot of just those little tips and tricks. You can drop in their logo as an image, so just sort of personalizing it a little bit more so that it becomes that thing that people want to use all the time and see their data connected to. And, again, it's making sure you're putting in data that people can make a decision with. And that's going to make these reports the most effective and efficient. So I feel like now I know what Chris feels like. I just talked for like 30 minutes straight.
That's good. You did have one thing about publishing like that, though. It is good just to have it emailed out to a bunch of users, especially if you got users who, for whatever reason, do have some admin capability and you don't want them messing around in your reports and playing with things. The last thing you need to do is to have somebody drag something off your page and ruin the report for everybody. So setting up that regular publish thing. And one other trick is to tag that, with be it its own graphic or using GA on the pages here to actually see who's looking at what pages and what reports. So you can keep an eye on usage and figure out, how much is the stuff actually getting read, or is there stuff that people are saying they're reading it, but they're actually not. You can get a better picture of how effective the reports really are.
I agree. And, if you are using this and pulling it into a presentation, then at least the data is being updated, but then you can start to annotate and add, your own notes to say, oh, it looks like in October, 6 people came to the homepage, but nobody went to, the contact us page. So what is it that we're not doing? And so, using this just as your starting off point to start to make those decisions is a really helpful thing to do. And you can see, and we're only using the example of Google Analytics data, but it has a lot of really good granular metrics that you can pull from. So you can see they'll show you the date metrics versus the text metrics versus the numeric metrics. You have the Metro ID. So obviously you would probably want to use a map or some sort of a table to see where people are coming from. So you have a lot of options of what people are doing. And then you can do, optional metric sliders. The auto date range is about the last 28 days, but you can do something more custom. You can do comparisons. I want to compare this to the last 28 days to see if the number went up or down. You can add a segment. And so these are the segments that you've created in Google Analytics, or you can go ahead. So see, it pulls in all the ones that you already have built into your system, or you can go ahead and create something new. And then you can create a filter. And so you might want to filter, I only want to see this type of like new users versus returning users, whatever the filter is that you want to see. And then you can add a field. So you can do a very lightweight calculated field. So maybe you want to add the total number of goals together. So, but not all the goals. So let's say I just want a calculated metric for contact form and for newsletter, but I don't want the other 2 goals. So I would just create, only the goals I care about. And then I would start to pull in those goals. And so I would look for, goal 2 or goal 3 and goal 4, and I would add those total values together. Now, the reason it has, all the way up to 20 is because you have 20 goals in Google Analytics that you can use, but I obviously only have 4 goals that I'm using. So I would be looking for those specific goals. I would calculate them together, and then that would become the field, the new variable of only the goals I care about. And you can do that with other parameters. It really just depends on what it is that you're after. So again, it's making sure that you're doing that planning before you just go ahead and just start throwing things at a dashboard.
Yeah, that's great. Another thing for these kinds of pages too is any A/B testing or multivariate testing. It's great to have. You can just have
Hmm.
your whole scoreboard over there, and then when you come in the morning, you can just see, okay, who's got the green bar graph, which are the ones that hit. Use conditional colors to show you
Yep.
which pages are hot, and you can sort through. Instead of having to troll through 50 or 60 pages or 20 A/B tests or whatever, you can just look at the winners and go.
Yep, absolutely. And that's where bringing in more than one kind of data into your dashboard, don't be limited by just Google Analytics. You could pull in your Search Console data. You can pull in your Google Ads data. Um, and again, you have all of these other kinds of data, 288 non-Google data, and then you can build your own connector. So there's a lot of flexibility with this. And if you set it up correctly, then it will just keep running and just keep giving you new information. And it'll just be just one less thing that you have to worry about. I'm a big fan of automated reporting. So we haven't had a lot of questions today, John, but I'm going to take that as a sign that we did an excellent job.
The thing does speak for itself. That's the one thing for this. They've done a great job in making it accessible. It's pretty much the opposite of Google Analytics. You can figure it out. And the thing is, you can test on the fly. You just drag stuff out there and run it and see if it works or not works. It's not like you have to do all kinds of crazy testing. You can play with it as you go. So yeah, we'll keep the queue open for any other questions if folks want to throw us stuff. But yeah, no, that's a good tour, good first look.
Well, and I think that, I don't want people to be intimidated by Data Studio. One of the reasons I really, really like it is because it is so flexible, and it's really difficult to make a mistake on it because you're not manipulating the data in Data Studio. You're really just pulling in what exists from the system itself. So this is really, look at Data Studio kind of like a sandbox where you can sort of mix and match and see, well, what does it look like if I put this and this together? Can I make a decision from this? Or, my boss is asking me, what is, total social, for the month? What does Facebook look like? What is this? I'm tired of pulling 4 different reports. Is there a way that I can pull it all together in one place? So that will up the likelihood that they will actually look at the report on a regular basis. So use this as a sandbox to really sort of play around with automating some of the current reports that you're doing. If you're doing the same report over and over again, every week, every month, or even every quarter, then bringing it into Data Studio is a really good option for you because it's predictable. You already know what people want to see, and there may be some ways to automate this. And if you go and only automate pieces of it, then you can then just screenshot from Data Studio and pull it into the report that you're doing. But you've saved yourself some time in pulling that data because you've automated a good chunk of it. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and bring it just back to our little heads, John.
All right. Yeah, that's a good tour. No, there's so much to be done on this front, and it's definitely it just saves you a ton of time once you've got it built out the way you want it to work. So you really can't lose by getting this stuff up and running.
And I think, again, you can export the data if someone is sending you a report, so you can export the raw data. You can move things in real time and you haven't lost data because, again, the data is just coming from the system. You're just visualizing it. But I really would encourage you to do even a lightweight planning session before you start putting together a dashboard or report, just so you have some sort of sense of what is the story I'm trying to tell with this particular thing. What do I want people to make a decision from with this report? So, I have separate KPIs, separate metric sheets where I track everything because I just want to see the growth over time, but I'm not making hardcore decisions with that data. So I'm not going to take the time to pull it into a Data Studio dashboard. It's just for my own benefit. But if there was data, like our sales pipeline or those kinds of things that I could pull into a dashboard, which we actually do have those set up, then that's the kind of thing that I would make sure that I'm automating. And then I'm looking at on a weekly basis and using it to review with the team and then making decisions. It looks like this part of our sales funnel might be struggling a little bit. What can we do? So using dashboard as that conversation piece versus spending your time building the report. So you're taking more action versus doing the report building itself. So what do you think, John? Would Chris be proud of us today?
We made it through alive. That's really all that matters. You just need to make it to the end of the run.
So Chris will be back with us next week. So if you missed out on the hardcore data science, don't worry, he will be back. But, John and I, we try to keep it real. We try to make sure that we're bringing in a little bit more of the practicality as well. Because I'm not a data scientist. John, I don't know about you. Are you a data scientist?
I'm an economist, but I tend to disavow my time in that industry. So,
all right. So look out for us next week, and we will be letting you know within the next day or so what topics we will be covering in the upcoming weeks. So, John, if there's nothing else, I think we are good for this week.
That sounds good. Thanks for checking out, everybody. We will see you next week.
Thanks for watching today. Be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you're watching it. For more resources and to learn more, check out the Trust Insights podcast at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast and a weekly email newsletter at trustinsights.ai/newsletter. Got questions about what you saw in today's episode? Join our free Analytics for Marketers Slack group at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. See you next time.